"There are 3 rules," said the Duke of Islington, 1 hour after the wedding, "and I will not repeat them." His bride, who had spent that entire hour being handed in and out of a traveling carriage without once being spoken to, folded her hands in her lap and said, "Then your grace had better say them slowly." Cashin Islington stopped in the middle of his own hall. He had chosen her, he had told himself, for precisely the opposite of this. He had chosen Clemency Fairborn because she was 25 and portionless, because her father had died owing £11,000 to 8 men, one of whom was the Duke of Islington, and because a woman in that position could be relied upon to be grateful, silent, and absent. He had met her exactly twice. On the first occasion she had said 7 words. On the second she had said, "Yes, your grace, on my sister's account, thank you," and signed her name, and that had seemed to him the whole of her. The stone hall of Islington Hall went up 60 feet above them into darkness. Rain moved across the high windows. 22 servants stood in 2 lines and pretended to be furniture. "Rule the first," said Cashin. "You will not enter the west wing, not the corridor, not the stair, not the doors at the end of it. That part of this house is closed, and it will remain closed." May one ask why? One may not. That is rather the point of it. He walked on. She kept pace, which he had not expected. She was a head shorter than he was, and she did not scurry. "Rule the second. I breakfast alone at 7. You will not come down before noon, and you will not question me concerning my family, my mourning, or my history. I have married a wife. I have not engaged a confessor. Rule the third. You will not interfere in the running of Islington. Not the household, not the estate, not the village, not the tenants, not the servants, not the schoolroom, not the almshouse, not the drains. Mrs. Prewitt keeps my house and Mr. Nash keeps my land, and both of them have done it well for years. You will have the blue apartments, 400 a year for your own use, your sister's school fees paid to her majority, and the freedom of the park." He turned at the foot of the great stair. "You will find, madam, that those are extremely generous terms. Clemency Fairborn Clemency Islington, now Duchess of Islington, in a grey silk gown that had been dyed twice, and a bonnet with 1 honest ribbon, looked up at him for a moment with her head a little on one side, in the manner of a woman examining a horse she has been told not to buy. "Your grace has given me 3 rules and a great deal of money," she said, "and no reason for any of it. Do you know, I find that the least generous thing anybody has ever done to me, and my uncle once gave me a dead canary in a box." "Madam." "Good night, sir," said his wife pleasantly, and went up his staircase without waiting for him, and left the 9th Duke of Islington standing in his own hall with his mouth open in front of 22 servants. Bell the butler developed a cough. "Say 1 word," Cashin told him. "I have no words at all, your grace," said Bell, "which is fortunate, as I should certainly have used them." She broke the 3rd rule on Tuesday. He learned of it at 4 in the afternoon, when Mrs. Prewitt came to the library with her keys held in front of her like a shield, and her chin, trembling with the particular outrage of a woman who has been contradicted in her own laundry. "Her Grace," said Mrs. Prewitt, "has put Annie Cobb back." Cashin put down his pen. "Who is Annie Cobb?" "The under laundress I turned off Saturday, your grace, for insolence, and for breaking the blue ewer, and I will not have my authority." "Then I shall speak to the Duchess." He found her in the still room. She had her sleeves turned back to the elbow, and a bowl of quinces in front of her, and a bruised-looking girl of about 17 at her side, who leapt up and curtsied so hard, she nearly went over. "Go and find something to do at the other end of the house, Annie," said the Duchess of Islington kindly, "and do it thoroughly." Annie fled. Cashin shut the door. "Rule the third," he said, Yes. His wife went on peeling quinces. I broke it at 10:30 this morning, and I have been looking forward to this conversation ever since. Do sit down. You are very tall, and it makes a room feel like a scolding. Mrs. Pruitt dismissed that girl for insolence. Mrs. Pruitt dismissed that girl for weeping in the linen passage, which she was doing because her mother has a growth in her side, and there are 4 younger ones at home, and no money for the physician at Furring. The blue ewer was cracked in March. I found it in the store cupboard with the crack mended in old glue, which means somebody else broke it, and Annie was simply the last hand it passed through. She looked up. And insolence, Your Grace, in my experience of great houses, means a person answered back when they were right, which is the very worst thing a poor person can do. Cashin was silent for a moment. You have been in this house 2 days. 2.5. There is nothing else to do here. You have forbidden me the west wing, the breakfast table, and every single occupation a woman of sense might take up, so I have spent my time doing what I am permitted to do, which is walking about and listening. She set down the knife. Sir, your housekeeper is not a cruel woman. She is a frightened one. She is 61 and her sight is going, and she has decided that if she is very hard about ewers nobody will notice she can no longer read the linen lists. I have offered to read them to her twice a week, and to say nothing about it to anybody, and she cried, and then she took the girl back, and now she has come to you to complain of me because her pride requires it. If you would be so good as to be angry with me in front of her tomorrow, the whole thing will be quite mended. The Duke of Islington stood in his own still room, and could not, for a full 10 seconds, produce a single word. You want me to reprimand you, he said, for the sake of my housekeeper's feelings. Loudly, said Clemency. In the hall, if it can be managed. She will be perfectly happy afterwards, and so shall I. And Annie Cobb's mother. Ah, she had the grace to look somewhat guilty. I have sent for the physician at Furring on Thursday, and I am afraid I have said that your grace desired it, because a duke's name opens a door and mine opens nothing at all yet. I shall pay for it out of my 400, so you may consider it a private extravagance, like a hat. Cashin Islington walked to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped and the light was coming in low and copper across the wet lawns, and the whole park stood shining. You will not pay for it out of your 400, he said at last, without turning round. The estate has a fund for the sick. Nash keeps it. Apply to him. Nash's fund, said his wife, has not paid out a shilling in 19 months. That cannot be true. I have seen the book, sir. You have not seen the book, madam, because the book is in Nash's office, and you have been in this house for 2.5 days. There was a silence of a very particular quality. 2.5 days, said Clemency Islington, is a great deal of time if one is not permitted to speak to anybody before noon. He got out of the still room with what he considered great dignity, and then stood in the passage for some minutes with his hand over his mouth, and discovered, to his considerable alarm, that what he was doing was laughing. He had not laughed in the passages of Islington Hall for 4 years. That night he sat late with the estate accounts, and at 11 he sent for Nash's sick fund book, and at 1 in the morning he understood that his wife had been right, and that a steward of 19 years' standing had let a charity fund sit idle, because there was no one above him who had ever asked, and that Cashin Islington had spent 4 years arranging his life so that nobody would ever ask him anything. He reprimanded her in the hall the next morning at 11 o'clock, at some volume, on the subject of laundry maids and the sanctity of a housekeeper's authority. Mrs. Pruitt happened to be crossing with a tray, and was obliged to stop and be scandalized. His wife received the whole of it with her eyes lowered and her hands folded, and said, "Yes, your grace." "I am very sorry, Your Grace," in a voice of such crushed and perfect meekness that Cashin nearly lost his countenance twice. And as she turned away, she looked up at him for half a second with an expression of pure, wicked delight, and he had to go out and look at a horse. Mrs. Prewitt was heard singing in the linen room that afternoon. Annie Cobb's mother had the physician on Thursday and lived 11 more years. And on Friday, the Duchess of Islington broke the second rule. She was sitting at the breakfast table at 7 o'clock in the morning, fully dressed, with the newspaper. Cashin stood in the doorway. Belle, behind him, achieved the remarkable feat of pouring coffee while facing entirely away from the table. "Rule the second," said the Duke of Islington. "Good morning," said his wife. "There is a deviled kidney and I have taken the whole of the toast, for which I apologize, but I have been awake since 5. "Madam, Rule the second." "Rule the second says that I will not come down before noon." She turned a page. "It says nothing whatever about not coming down before 7. I was in this chair at 20 minutes past 6. I have not broken your rule, Your Grace. I have gone round the outside of it, which I understood to be the whole art of being a duchess." Cashin sat down, because his legs had made the decision without him. "That," he said, "is sophistry." "It is Thursday's sophistry. I thought of it Thursday and then had to wait a whole day, which was agony." She looked at him over the paper. "Sir, will you tell me what you actually mind? Because I do not believe for a moment that you mind conversation at breakfast. I think you mind being looked at before you have got your face on. And I should like to say that I have no interest in your face at 7 in the morning. I have an interest in the newspaper, which you receive 4 days before it reaches my sister's school, and in the kidneys, which are extremely good." He opened his mouth to end the discussion, and instead heard himself say, "The cook is from Dorsetshire. It is a Dorsetshire receipt." "Then I shall have it written down and taught to my sister's cook, who fries everything grey." They ate in silence for 4 minutes. It was, he noticed, not an uncomfortable silence. It was the first meal he had eaten in company in 4 years that had not required him to be a duke through the whole of it. Then she said, "Who was the boy on the black pony?" Cashin set down his cup very carefully. "In the long gallery," Clemency went on, quite gently, "there is a picture of 2 boys. The elder is about 12 and holding the bridle and looking as though somebody has just told him to stand still, which I take to be you. The younger is about 8 and on the pony and laughing. The frame has been polished this week. Nothing else at that end of the gallery has been dusted since Michaelmas." "Rule the second," said Cashin, "forbids questions concerning my family." "So it does." She put her napkin down and stood. "Then I shall not ask it again, but I shall tell you one thing and you may fine me for it. In 3 days in this house I have found a housekeeper who cannot read her lists, a steward who has stopped opening a charity book, a West Wing nobody goes into, and a duke who has arranged his entire household so that no living soul is permitted within 6 feet of him before noon. Sir, that is not a family seat. That is a man holding his breath." She paused at the door. "It has been 4 years, I think. The gallery frame is polished on the anniversary. Belle told me nothing. Belle is a rock, but the flowers in the chapel are changed on the 11th of every month, and the gardener is not a rock at all." She went out. Cashin Islington sat in his own breakfast room until the coffee went cold, and did not move. Theodore Islington had been 8 years old on that pony. He had been 23 when he stood in the library of this house, and told his brother that he intended to marry a cardsharper's daughter from Portsmouth. And Cashin knew to the title, 28, stiff, as a poker with the terror of doing it all wrong, had said the unforgivable thing. He had said that no brother of his would drag the name into the gutter, and that Theo might choose between the woman and Islington. and that if he chose her, he need not write. Theo had chosen her. Theo had not written. Theo had taken a berth in a packet out of Falmouth in the November gales because a passage was cheaper than a license, and the packet had gone down 11 miles off the Manacles with all hands, and the last thing Cassian Islington had ever said to his brother in this room at this table was that he need not write. There had been no cardsharper's daughter to console. She had married a corn merchant the following spring. That was the joke of it, if one had a taste for such jokes. He had broken the only thing he loved in the world for a woman who had not even waited out the morning. He rode for 6 hours that day, and came home in the dark. On Saturday the county came to dinner, because a new duchess must be shown, and because Lady Marisol Vantage had been at him for 11 days by letter, and could not be put off. Cassian dreaded it the way he dreaded few things. He had married a portionless woman of 25, with a father who had died owing money to half of Wexmoor, and he knew precisely how 16 people at a long table would use that. They began at the soup. "Fairborn," said Lady Marisol, tasting the name. "There was a Sir Hugo Fairborn who had a place near Furring, was there not? It went at auction, I think. Such a pity. One does hate to see a family come down." "One does," agreed the Duchess of Islington. "Though I have always thought coming down is much less interesting than what one does afterwards. My father's library went for £109, and I read the whole of it first, so I consider that I got the best of the bargain, and the bookseller got the boards." "You have no fortune at all, then," said Lady Marisol, with the sweetness of a woman putting in the knife where the tablecloth hides it. "Not a farthing." "How brave of you to say so." "How kind of you to ask so directly," said Clemency. "It saves such a quantity of guessing, and it does prevent the tedious business of anybody supposing his Grace married me for money, which would have been very silly of him, and would have reflected badly on his arithmetic." A young man at the other end laughed, and turned it into a cough. Lady Marisol tried once more at the second course from a different quarter. "You will find Islington a dull place for a bride, I fear. The Duke does not entertain. The Duke does not go up to town. The Duke does not dance." "The Duke does not dance," said his wife, with the first genuine interest she had shown all evening. "Not for 4 years." "Then I am fortunate," said Clemency, "for neither do I dance the way a heron walks. We shall sit together at every ball in the county and be thought profound." And the table, 16 people who had come to watch a bankrupt's daughter be quietly skinned laughed with her, at Lady Marisol twice, before the game came in. Cassian sat at the head of his table and watched his wife handle a room, and understood 2 things with equal clarity. The first was that she was not brave. She was frightened. He could see it in the way she held her glass, and she was doing it anyway. The second was that he had married her under the impression that he was rescuing her from a bad situation, and that she had come into this house and looked round it and concluded, quite obviously and within a day, that the person in the bad situation was him. The storm came up that night out of the west. It came up the way the big ones do on that coast, with a still hour first and then a wind that hit the whole face of the house at once, and by 2 in the morning the rain was going across the windows like shot, and there was slate coming off somewhere at the far end. Cassian was awake. He was always awake in a gale. He had been awake in every gale for 4 years. At 2:30 he heard a door. He came out onto the landing with a candle, and saw the door of the west corridor standing open, and light beyond it. Everything in him went very cold and very quiet. He walked the length of that corridor 31 paces. He had counted them once, 4 years ago, on the night he had ordered it shut and pushed open the door at the end. The window had gone. The whole casement had come in with the wind and lay in the middle of the floor in a wreck of glass and lead, and the rain was driving straight through into the room, and everything in that room was 4 years old and had not been touched. The narrow bed, the fowling piece on its pegs, the boots, the telescope on its tripod, the model of a brig on the mantel with real rigging on it. And Clemency, Islington, was on her knees on the wet boards in her nightgown and a shawl and no shoes, with her hair down her back, building a wall. She had dragged the writing table across the room to break the wind. She had a hip bath appended over the model brig. She had bundled the bedding round the telescope, and she was, at that moment, lifting a japanned box of papers out of a puddle and holding it against her chest. And there were letters everywhere, letters and drawings and a schoolboy's Latin exercises, in a hand Cassian had not seen since he was 28. And she was laying them out, one by one, on the dry side of the room, on the floor, in rows, and putting a book or a boot or a candlestick on each corner so the wind should not take them. She looked up. Her face was streaming and her lips were blue with cold. "Rule the first," she said. "Your Grace, I am so very sorry. I heard the glass and there was nobody awake on this side and I could not get anyone quickly, and the water was already at the desk." Cassian Islington could not speak at all. "I have not read them," she said quickly. "I turned them face down. I did not read one word, I swear it to you." And then her voice broke, and she held the japanned box out to him with both hands, like a servant, like a child, like a woman handing over the only thing she had. "But they were getting wet, sir. They were getting wet, and I did not know how much they mattered, and I thought if they mattered at all. And I stood in the corridor obeying you while the rain came in. You would never forgive me. And I would rather you did not forgive me for coming in." He crossed the room and took the box out of her hands and set it on the dry boards. Then he took off his dressing gown and put it round her shoulders and held it closed at her throat with one fist, and stood there, and the rain came in over both of them. "His name was Theodore," said the Duke of Islington. Clemency did not say a word. That, he thought afterwards, was the greatest kindness anybody had done him in 4 years. He was 9 years younger than me. Our mother died when he was 4, and I had the raising of him more than my father ever did, and he was— Cassian stopped. He had not attempted this sentence before. There was no path worn to it. He was a great deal better than me. He was funny. He was extremely funny, and he was kind to everybody in this house, without ever once deciding to be. And he was going to be a naval man because of that brig on the mantel, and he could not do a line of Latin to save his soul. The wind came round the corner of the house, and the whole room breathed. 4 years ago he stood in my library and told me he was going to marry a woman I thought unsuitable, and I was 28, and I had had the title 11 months, and I was frightened out of my wits of being a bad duke. So I said the worst thing that has ever been said in this house. I told him to choose, and when he chose her, I told him he need not write. Cassian heard his own voice go flat and strange. He took a cheap passage out of Falmouth in November because he had no money, because I had stopped it. The packet went down 11 miles out. They found 4 of the 11, not him. "Cassian," she said. It was the first time she had used it. "I had this room shut the day the news came," he said. "I have not been through that door since. I gave the order in the corridor, and I have kept it for 4 years, and I have made the whole of this house keep it, and I told myself that was respect." He looked at the rows of paper laid out on the floor with a boot and a candlestick and his wife's own hairbrush weighting the corners. It was not respect. It was a man walking round a hole in the floor for 4 years and calling it a carpet. She moved then, only a little, only enough that her shoulder came against his arm and stayed there. "They are not ruined," she said. "The bottom 3 inches are gone from some of them. Most are only damp. Paper is much braver than people think. If we hang them on a line in front of a fire tonight, they will be dry by morning, and only a little cockled, and you may read them whenever you like, or in 10 years, or never, but they will be there. You want me to hang my brother's letters on a line like washing? Yes, said the Duchess of Islington. And then I want you to eat something, because you have not eaten since the soup, and I want you to sit down in front of that fire and tell me what he was funny about. Not the drowning. Anybody can tell that story. The newspapers told it. Nobody alive can tell me what he was funny about except you. And when you are dead, it will be gone out of the world altogether. And I think that is what you have actually been afraid of, sir. And I think it is why you polish that frame yourself. Cassian Islington stood in the wreck of his brother's room with the rain on his face, and found that he was weeping, properly, badly, without any of the management he had believed to be permanent, and that his wife of 6 days had put both arms around him and was holding on with a grip entirely out of proportion to her size. They hung the letters on a line in the blue apartments in front of the fire, on a length of tape from her workbox, pegged with hairpins. It took until nearly 5. Belle came up at some point with tea and the cold pie and a face of magnificent blankness, and went away, and told the servants' hall nothing whatever, and was never afterwards heard to speak of it, and got a farm at the end of his service. And at 5:30 in the morning, with the storm going off eastward and the first grey in the windows, Cassian sat on the hearthrug with his back against a chair, and told her about a boy who had once put a live crab in a bishop's hat. He talked for 2 hours. She laughed in all the places where laughing was the only decent response, and did not laugh in the others, and asked exactly the right small questions. What was the crab called? Did the bishop know? What did their father do? And by the time the maids were laying fires downstairs, the 9th Duke of Islington had said his brother's name aloud 11 times without dying of it, and had discovered that grief let out into the room was about 1/3 the weight of grief kept in a corridor. Rule the second, he said at last, hoarse, staring into the fire. You have broken it comprehensively. I have broken all 3 inside the week, said his wife. I should like that noted. It is my only accomplishment. I have no fortune and I cannot dance. Then I shall make new rules. Cassian turned his head. She was sitting with her knees drawn up and her hair drying anyhow, and one of her sleeves scorched at the cuff from the fire, and he had never in his life seen anything he wanted so much to keep. Rule the first. The west corridor is open. The room is aired, the window mended, the brig dusted, and the door stays open, and if I walk past it, I shall walk past it as a man and not as a coward. Yes. Rule the second. You will come down to breakfast at any hour that pleases you, and you will talk to me, and you will ask me anything at all, and I will answer it. And on the days when I cannot answer it, I will say so instead of leaving the room. He drew a breath. That will take practice. You may practice on me, said Clemency. I am extremely patient. I once waited a whole day to use a piece of sophistry. Rule the third. And here he stopped and had to begin again. Interfere with everything, with Prewitt's lists and Nash's book and the almshouse and the drains and the village school, and with me, particularly with me. I have been 6 days married, and this house has changed more than in 4 years, and I have been in a temper about it precisely twice, and both times I was wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. You will have to say the other thing, you know, she said. The one you have been not saying since Tuesday. I shall not guess it for you. I have done all the work in this marriage so far, and I am tired. Cassian Islington laughed, cracked and unlovely and entirely real, and reached over and took his wife's hand, and turned it, and pressed his mouth to the palm of it. I married you, he said, because I wanted a woman who would never come near me. I have got a woman who came straight through 3 locked rules in 6 days and knelt in broken glass in her bare feet at 2:30 in the morning to keep my brother's letters out of the wet. I do not know what that is called in the marriage service. I know what it is called in me." He held her hand against his chest. "Clemency, I love you. I have loved you since the still room and the quinces, and I have been extremely rude about it ever since." "Yes," she said unsteadily. "You have been very rude. It has been the loveliest week of my life." "You are shaking." "I am freezing, sir. I have been sitting in a wet nightgown on a hearthrug for 4 hours listening to a man talk about a crab." The Duke of Islington stood up and picked his wife up off the hearthrug altogether, which startled a small shriek out of her and made her laugh into his shoulder, and carried her out of the blue apartments. And the maids on the back stairs heard a door close, and the fire in that room was let go out, and nobody in the house saw either of them until the following afternoon. They opened the west wing on the Monday. She had the window mended and the boards scrubbed and the brig dusted and the fowling piece oiled, and then she did the thing that Cashin had not thought of and never forgot. She had the boy's telescope carried down and set up on the terrace, on its tripod, where anybody might use it, and she used it herself nearly every clear evening for the next 40 years, and taught their sons to use it, and told them whose it had been. Theodore Islington's name was spoken at that dinner table as a matter of ordinary course, the way one speaks of a man who has stepped out to look at a horse. The county gave a ball at the Assembly Rooms at Ferring in the last week of the month, and the Duke and Duchess of Islington attended it, which in itself kept 4 villages in conversation for a fortnight. Cashin knew exactly what was intended. Lady Marisol Vantage had had a bad dinner and meant to have a good ball, and she had arranged matters with the care of a general. The Duchess placed at the edge of the floor between 2 pillars where a woman may be seen not dancing, the fashionable set gathering by degrees on the other side. A remark dropped audibly at the right moment that Islington had brought a wife who was as ornamental at a ball as a hat stand, and that, of course, it was a great mercy His Grace did not dance either, since it saved them both the exposure. There was that particular silence afterwards that means a room has heard something and is deciding whether to enjoy it. Cashin saw his wife's chin come up half an inch. He saw her open her fan and look at the floor, and for the first time in 3 weeks be, quite simply, hurt. He had not danced in 4 years. He had not danced since a boy of 23 had walked out of his library, and he had told himself the whole time that this was because he did not care to. The Duke of Islington set down his glass, crossed the entire length of the room 31 paces. He found himself counting them, and bowed to his own wife in front of 200 people. "Madam," he said, "the next 2 if you are not engaged." "Sir," her voice was not steady at all, "you know perfectly well that I dance like a heron." "So do I. We shall be a rookery." He put out his hand. "Come and be talked about." She came. The band, which had never in its existence been watched so closely, struck up, and the Duke and Duchess of Islington danced 2 dances very badly indeed, with an entire assembly standing round the walls in silence, and she trod on him twice, and he laughed out loud in a public room, which was reported in 3 separate letters that night as a thing not seen in the county since the old Duke's day. They were still dancing when the rest of the room, unable to bear being left out of anything, gave up and joined in. In November, they went down to the coast, and stood on the cliff above the manacles in a wind that took her bonnet clean off into the sea, and Cashin read out the last letter his brother had ever sent him, the one he had never opened until his wife dried it on a tape line with hairpins, and then folded it and put it back in his coat, because it was his, and because he had a wife holding onto his arm with both hands, and because a man may keep a letter without living in a corridor. Mrs. Prewitt had her lists read to her twice a week for 9 more years, and went to her grave believing that nobody had ever known. Nash's sick fund paid out £400 the first winter. Lady Marisol Vantage, who had come to see a bankrupt's daughter skinned at a dinner table, ended by naming a daughter Clemency, which the Duchess of Islington always said was the most complete revenge available to a woman without a farthing. And on the anniversary of their wedding, every year, Cassian would find on his plate at breakfast, at whatever hour he came down, since there were no rules about it, a folded paper in his wife's hand with 3 lines on it. Rule the first, do not hold your breath. Rule the second, tell me the thing. Rule the third, come to bed, my love, the letters are dry.